Today, we will be talking about the potential for quantum computers to help design novel materials and solve problems in chemistry by making calculations that classical computers haven't been capable of. We've got three experts in the field here who I'd like to introduce to you. Christian Gogolin is a physicist at Covestro, a company that specializes in polymer materials. He works there on quantum algorithms for simulating chemistry and is a co-founder of the open access journal Quantum. We also have Chi-Gao Koch of Mitsubishi Chemical, where he is the team leader of quantum computing research. He collaborates with IBM and Keio University on quantum computing applications in quantum chemistry and artificial intelligence calculations. And finally, we have Thomas Eckel, who works in the Computational Materials Engineering Group at the German engineering company Bosch. He's developing ways to join quantum computers and classical computers to simulate materials. So let's jump into a discussion with our panelists, and we'll start with you, Dr. Eckel. What makes quantum computers so useful for materials design?
Well, if you want to do a quantum mechanical material simulation on a classical computer and you want to do an exact one, then the amount of memory you would need to do this calculation would scale exponentially as a function of system size. Whereas on a quantum computer, the amount of resources you would need for the same calculation would only scale linearly with a number of qubits, which means that for problems which are classically difficult to solve and where you cannot make an approximation, that are, for example, strongly correlated electron systems, which are, for example, transition metal oxides. For these type of electronic systems, quantum computers would be much faster and much more precise than any classical computer. And it would even open completely new material classes for computational materials design.
Great. So I have a question that I'm going to throw to each of you on the panel, and I'd like to ask each of you to give us an example of a type of material that you hope to investigate with quantum computing. So let's start with you, Dr. Gogolin.
Yeah, so as a company producing polymers, we are of course very interested in understanding both the organic chemistry of those polymers as well as the properties of the materials that are made from those raw materials that we're producing. But then in the production of those raw materials, and that's of course our core business, there's also a lot of inorganic chemistry going on, a lot of catalysis, both heterogeneous and homogeneous. And so we are really interested in a very broad range of chemistry, and we hope that quantum computing can become a new sharp tool that allows us to simulate processes that we can't simulate with classical computers there.
Great. How about you, Dr. Koch? What's a material that you're looking into?
Yes, and I would like to indicate that in chemical industry, and currently we are using density function theory called DFT method for material design. And for classic computer, it can handle a very huge molecule using DFT method, say about roughly several thousand molecule orbitals. However, the primary limitation for DFT method is that it may give some inaccurate results for some specific materials. So we hope we can use quantum computing to investigate these specific materials. These specs may include electronic and photonic materials, such as OLED and photovoltaic. And also it includes materials which energy level are very degeneracy. These materials are lithium battery materials and catalysis materials using transition metal. Thank you.
Got it. And how about you, Dr. Eckel?
So the materials which are of interest to us are, for example, manganese oxide-based materials, which are used in solid oxide fuel cells or in batteries. Another material class would be magnets or rare earth-containing magnets, which are used in electric engines. And a third type of material class would be new materials for advanced sensor elements. And for all of these type of applications, we want to improve the performance and the lifetime of the materials by means of these quantum mechanical simulations.
Right. So we have not yet reached the point where quantum computers have enough qubits to actually do these calculations, right? So how soon do you think that we'll have a working quantum computer that's ready to take this on? Dr. Coach, what do you think?
Yes, so actually in our company, we estimated the cross point between classical computer and quantum computer. And we estimate that the cross point is for the calculation on about 6 qubit systems. So I think the question is how soon we can achieve the cross point. And due to the roadmap shown by an IBM team, which doubled and performance of quantum computing every year, we think we may achieve this point in the next 5 to 10 years. Of course, if the roadmap will be much speed up, and if we can find some much sophisticated algorithm, maybe we can get to the point much sooner.
I mean, that's pretty soon. That's very exciting.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Gogolin, what are the main technological hurdles that you think we'll have to solve to get to that point?
So what is really important to understand about this use case of quantum chemistry and material simulation is, and that's different compared to many other use cases of quantum computing that people talk about a lot, is that you really don't actually need that many qubits to do something a classical computer can no longer do. Something between 50 and 100 extremely well or perfectly working qubits would be well enough to do things that would be very challenging to repeat on a classical computer. So what we really need is not to increase the number of qubits. That would actually be almost already sufficient in the devices we have today. But if we want to have a chance to reach a quantum advantage with a non-error corrected device, then we definitely need to increase the quality of the qubits, and especially also the quality of both gates and readouts quite substantially.
Got it. So now I'd like to ask each of you to take on another question, which is, what do you think is one of the most exciting developments in this area that you've seen recently? And let's start with you, Dr. Eckel.
Okay, so for me, the most impressive thing is that we are really getting something meaningful out of the quantum computers. For example, there was a very recent publication of Google and co-workers on spin charge separation in the 1D Hubbard model, and it is really impressive to see the results there and the quality of the results, which are already comparable to the classical computers. And it really shows that it's working, and that we are making progress, and that we can be very confident to really be able to use quantum computers in about 5 years, as we just discussed for our materials simulation.
Great. Dr. Coach, what excites you these days?
Yes, and our aim is to perform calculation on real device. So to me, the most exciting technology in the recent year is some methodology and the means which has been shown to make a near-term device called a NISQ device being possible to solve chemistry problems. For example, the hardware efficient answers and the error mitigation approaches, which was proposed by IBM team and published in Nature Journal, is very exciting to me. And also some studies of how to perform calculation on the real device for the excited state calculations is also very exciting to me.
Great. And Dr. Gogolin, what are you looking at?
Yeah, so what I find really amazing, coming from a quantum algorithm development point of view, is that until very recently, quantum algorithm development was best done with the help of simulators, because the quantum computers were so noisy that you couldn't actually reasonably test your algorithms on them, and you would be or you were better advised testing them on a simulator, even if you wanted to investigate, for example, how stable your algorithm would be against noise. It was much more useful to simulate noise models. And we have now reached a point where quantum computers have become so good and so large that it has actually become very challenging to simulate the performance of algorithms that can deal with a certain degree of noise on simulated quantum computers. And it's just now becoming interesting to use the quantum computers that we have from the latest generation for the development and the benchmarking of new algorithms. And that opens up a whole new perspective for the field.
Yeah, I mean, I'm amazed a bunch of you have mentioned the idea of like 5 years, 10 years, which is very near term. So does that make materials design one of quantum computing's first real killer apps or first applications that we're probably likely going to see? What do you think,
That,
Dr. Eckel?
definitely. I mean, as we just heard, we just need about 50 to 100 high quality qubits. I mean, we're almost there. And that's why I strongly believe that this application is really the first killer application for using quantum computers. And other type of application would need much more qubits. Some application need even error-corrected qubits, which means we would need orders of magnitude more qubits, which is still a long path down the road. But quantum computing for material simulation really is very close to become a reality.
So say that you were handed this perfect working quantum computer that met your specification needs tomorrow. Would you be ready to take advantage of it, or what do you need? I mean, how far along are we on algorithms to be able to use these things for the applications that you're working on? What would it take to put this into practice? Dr. Gogolin?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I would very much like this to happen tomorrow, even though I admit that we wouldn't be able to squeeze out the maximum performance out of such a device tomorrow. That's certain. So we would definitely be able to use the machine. But there's still a lot of algorithm development that needs to be done in order to really make a quantum computer do something that is ultimately useful for a computational chemist and for industrial material design. So I'm actually quite happy that we still have a few years of time to develop those algorithms and to perfect our tools and to improve our algorithms until the first serious quantum computers arrive that will give us a quantum advantage.
Yeah. So looking forward to the future, once these machines are online and running, do you see quantum computers just completely taking over in the field of materials design? Or is this something where we're likely to see classical computers still play a role? Dr. Coach?
Yes, as I mentioned, and we are now using an DFT method for material design, and this method can done by classical computing for several thousand molecule orbitals. So I think for the materials which DFT is good enough, there is no need for quantum computing to take over a classical compute. And but for the materials which DFT is difficult to quantify, I think quantum computer can make a very essential role in material designs. And of course, I think because we are still in a very near-term era, and also currently the quantum computer is very noisy. So to use the quantum computer for material design I think the hybrid approach means use both quantum computer and classical computer to solve the quantum chemistry problems is absolutely, definitely needed.
Since you're all working on different types of materials, I'm curious to hear the same answer from the other two of you. Do you foresee giving up your classical computers, or will we never get to that point? Dr. Gogolin?
So,
Or Dr. Eckel, go ahead.
I strongly agree with what Dr. Koch was saying. So I really think that we will always have this hybrid approach where we solve one part of the problem on a classical computer, and only that part which is difficult to solve on a classical computer, put it on a quantum computer, which means we need to exactly develop these type of workflows which start from a classical calculation, from a classical density function theory calculation, and then we cut out these strongly correlated D-bands out of these DFT calculations and put this part on a quantum computer, solve it exactly, taking all quantum fluctuations, quantum dynamics into account, and then again evaluate the results and also add some error mitigation to it in order to have really useful results. So I think this is really the task that we as users of quantum computers need to do right now, so that we are ready to do the materials design on the quantum computers as soon as the hardware is also ready.
Dr. Gogolin, did you want to weigh in also?
Yeah, I can only agree. It is certainly the fact that there are many processes relevant to material design where the quantum mechanics of the underlying molecules and atoms doesn't play much of a role, and which is very well described by classical physics. And for example, molecular dynamics, classical molecular dynamics simulations can very well describe those processes. And one may potentially in the far future be able to also speed up those kind of simulations with quantum computers. But there's certainly a long time ahead where this hybrid quantum classical approach will be the way to go.
Great. I think we have time for one last question. And I'm curious about the prospects for commercializing this application of quantum computers. So you have the users, people who are going to hope to investigate new materials, and then you have the makers of the actual quantum computers like IBM or so on. So what kind of partnerships will you have to forge to be able to make this work? Does anybody want to take that one on?
So I think that there are very different types of partnership, because I mean we need to closely interact with hardware providers on the one hand, and on the other hand we also need to closely interact with the academic environment and with those guys developing the simulation methods and so on. So there needs to be really a network, an interacting network of all the stakeholders and key players in this area in order to make a really improvement.
Does anybody see challenges for making that network? Yeah.
Yes, and we are, and we think first we should do fundamental research, and in this point, we are joining IBM and Q Network. It's a very huge ecosystem. We can work with IBM and also work with universities, academias, and other industries. So I think this ecosystem is very benefit for us. And for the practical applications, we are now working directly with IBM and with some startup companies which can help us to develop the application which is for the real problems.
Great. Well, this has been a totally fascinating discussion, and it's quite exciting to to learn that this is just happening right now and will be happening in the very near future. So that gives us something to look forward to. Thank you all for joining us.